Hello, everyone. This is pretty. Hello, everyone. This is Christina Barn. You're watching Black Tea News. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Black Tea News. I'm your host, Christina Barr. I got a little tongue-tied in my beginning intro. Thank you guys for joining in with me today. I've got quite a bit of things to talk about. The Babylon Bee has been temporarily, I guess, suspended from posting. And, Twitter did one of their, well, this is hate speech, this tweet that you have, and you have to remove it. When you remove it, then we're going to restore your account. And they're like, we're not taking that down because it was true and it wasn't hate speech. So they named Rachel Levin, Dr. Rachel Levin, who's the Assistant Secretary of Health, as their Man of the Year. And so I'm sorry, not TikTok, Twitter named that it was hate speech violation. And they said, hey, you're blocked for like 12 hours, but hey, you can post after you remove this video, remove this tweet. And they said no, because we're not backing down on something that's not hate speech. It's not hateful to actually say the truth. So, someone's watching from Colorado. I heard you got some interesting stuff coming out of Colorado. Really, really aggressive pro-choice stuff coming out. We can talk about that another day. Godspeed to you out there in that liberal land. So I congratulate Babylon Bee for sticking to their guns. And I recall when the New York Post had their Hunter Biden story, and they're like, "We're not taking down our stuff. It's true." They locked them out of their account because for spreading misinformation or leaked materials or hacked materials or whatever. None of that was true. Of course, the story was true, and of course, they got it from the laptop that Hunter Biden abandoned a store in Delaware or whatever, and it wasn't hacked, it wasn't leaked or anything, but they said that they couldn't post until they removed it, and they said no, and then eventually I think they just ended up restoring it, and I don't think they removed it. But of course, the Hunter Biden laptop story was always true, and if you aren't paying attention, the New York Times finally recently acknowledged that it was true. So people were posting like 50 different like officials or whatever that claimed that it was Russian disinformation, and I think Brennan was one of the people on the list that I recognized, and so many people didn't have evidence to know that it was fake, but they went along saying it was fake because they did it to save Biden. But NPR, like, you must be wondering why we're not even going to mention this. Is because we don't want to waste our times with things that aren't factual. So a lot of heads should roll, but they got the result that they wanted. So what do they care that they weren't honest? What do they care that they weren't truthful? That's just unfortunately how our world is right now. So the media. So I congratulate Babylon Bee. I wonder if Twitter's going to bend first. I don't think that they're going to bend first. As people who are supporting Babylon Bee, who are buying like premium subscriptions or whatever to help support them. Um, but it's how far are these social media platforms going to push silencing free speech? And I know it's their platform, private company, etc. But you can't blatantly say things that are true. They some time ago they suspended um a Defiant L. A Defiant L just takes like an old tweet of like a Democrat or something, and then a current tweet that makes the first tweet look stupid. And they don't add commentary. They just have a side by side and then like a blown up picture of the person. And they got their account back, but people did raise a stink about it. So these companies are really, really getting at people, and hopefully, like Truth Social and other things work out to be alternatives. I don't know if it's going to be inclusive enough to get as big as like something else like Twitter and etc. I would guess not, but Godspeed to people who want to make alternatives, and Godspeed to everyone who's willing to fight. I also want to talk about Biden's SCOTUS nominee because last week we went through Senator Hawley's Twitter thread that detailed her getting pedophiles or people with child pornography lesser sentences, and there was a pretty big list. And he said, "We're waiting for more. They're kind of blocking it." And he's like, "We deserve to know more." And so he basically had a thread about it, but there wasn't a lot of other people talking about it. So when I mentioned it, and I'm like, "This needs further investigation. Like, it looks pretty solid what he's saying, but I like let's just be aware of this." So now the fact checkers have come out to try to, I don't know, debunk it by adding context, and it's like, but you're admitting it's true. So, not that context doesn't matter, but when you start giving so much context that you're going beyond the fact check, you need to just write an opinion piece. It's not really just you fact checking anymore. You're trying to push a particular narrative. So yeah, that thread was true. If you didn't watch that episode, we'll try to briefly go through a few of those things. And I'm definitely gonna cut those things and put a video out so people know. But I named this episode "Don't Be a Coward" because I think I said originally I didn't think the Republicans were gonna do much. It was gonna be pretty easy probably for the Democrats and not make a big fuss. I think her record is alarming, and I think it's willing to make a fuss about it. I think it's people should be willing to make a fuss about it. I do. I absolutely do. So we're going to talk about it, and I think people should make phone calls. I think Mitch McConnell should make sure that all the Republicans are lockstep with a heavy no. And Murkowski and Collins, who knows how they will bend? They're the two that I question. Um, and if Kamala Harris has to come and break the tie, let Kamala Harris come and break the tie. But hopefully there's such a big fuss about her record that maybe Manchin will say no. I know they would be very tempted to not say no because she's the first Black woman. But hey, there could have been other Black female people in that position of power if Democrats like Biden in the past didn't say they wanted to filibuster and them stuff too. So I they can use the race thing and the female thing as a block if they want to. But I said, they should be pretty easy unless they can find something pretty heinous in her record. And I think this is pretty bad. And the way that the media is trying to defend it is really, really silly because they're presenting it as if it's false, but they don't have a way to say that it's false. So we're gonna go through that today. I also wanted to show you guys this video that Live Action posted of a propaganda sort of population control sort of video that was in from 1968. And I just thought it was really creepy. It was really, really creepy. And I wanted to show it to you guys. Some people who were watching it like on TikTok, that's where they posted it, were like, this seems like it's not that big of a deal. There's plenty of people who are like, well, this is creepy. And some people are like, they're not talking about abortion. And I'm like, I don't think you guys know the history of some of the stuff with eugenics. So I wanted to show it to you guys, and then of course I'm gonna clip this and put it on TikTok so other people can see it and share it, etc. So before I jump into all that, no, that was a bit of a long intro. I do want to thank Brighter Mission Pack. I'm in their studio today, so I do thank them. As always, if I say something today that triggers you, they don't care. I don't care. It doesn't work like that. They just like uplifting conservative voices, and I do genuinely appreciate um, them continuously doing that, being good to me as I grow my channel, my TikToks, my everything. So I'm very appreciative of the Pride Mission Pack. They do a lot of really good work. Please make sure you guys go to blacktnews.com, check out different merchandise that I have, like the goat hoodies. I do have these in different colors. I do also have the t-shirts in different colors by popular request. So people are like, I love it, but it's too white. I have kids. I heard you all. And there are different options. So you guys can check out that stuff. Also, I voted for President Trump, and all I got was a spark peace bills, border security, ISIS, great energy independence, USMCA, record low unemployment, gas under $2. Don't we all miss that? No new wars, a tax cut, and this lousy t-shirt. So just look at some of that stuff I have on the website and trigger a leftist today. So for I don't have a meme today that I want to show you guys, but you are all aware of that. Well, maybe you're not all aware, but mostly aware about the Leah Thomas situation and placing first in a competition, which Leah just like bombed another competition, but I don't know, probably through that race, if I had to guess. But there's this conversation that I saw today on this video that I saw on Twitter that I wanted to share, and then there's this video. There's this guy in the background. His face kind of says everything. So I'm gonna show you the video. You guys can listen and pay attention to the guy, but I do have a picture of the guy afterwards if you missed him.
On the basis of the comfort, hang on the basis of the comfort and dignity of girls and women, I'm asking you, telling you, please do not use women's spaces. It makes them feel uncomfortable.
My girls and the other women I am with are very comfortable with me in the bathroom.
Well, fortunately, I'm not your daughter, and my daughter is also not your daughter.
Oh, that's right.
And she
So
would
she
feel,
should stay.
she would feel very uncomfortable. No, I
interrupted.
No, you
excuse
interrupted
me.
me.
Excuse me.
You interrupted
I'm not
me.
here for a debate. Beth, do you mind?
Right.
I would ask you to please call off your dog.
I beg your pardon. I'm asking you as a mother, do not use female spaces.
And I'm very uncomfortable.
It makes women and girls feel
mother,
very uncomfortable.
as a mother,
You
I
are
am-
not, how dare you?
As
You
a
are
mother,
not a
I
mother.
am very...
You're not a
You
mother.
never birthed your children. You are not a mother, Dawn.
Right,
I
I'm
took the job
just-
of mine, which is
I
even
was
more
asking you.
Yeah. So that was going on at the I guess at the competition, I suppose. But if you missed his face, I'm just kind of that says it all to me. Like, oh boy, oh boy. I think most Americans sort of feel like this dude here, but I do think more people should be like this blonde woman who was like, "This is not cool for people to just invade that sort of spaces and be respectful to women." And I don't understand why that is so hard for people to grasp, and why I understand that everyone can be happy in this scenario, but the bathrooms are where you go and you pee and you poop, and if you do that standing up or you do that sitting down, like, no, somewhere else. You don't need to be in the woman's spaces, okay? If it's about how you identify, I don't know why you have to, you can still identify in the men's room, you know? Just I don't know if he still got the stuff low or not, but, I don't know, certain things are biological, but they try to tie it to gender, and they try to say sex and gender are separate, when obviously how people act are intertwined in a very meaningful way and meaningless without each other. So again, I just thought this man's facial expression was pretty funny. So, Godspeed to anyone willing to stand up to the madness like the title says today. Don't be a coward. Don't be a coward. So, Rachel Levine, who is our assistant health secretary, was named as one of the women of the year for USA Today. There are several, I suppose, and he was one of them. By the way, I do not care about your gender pronouns. If that triggers you, again, no one cares. And not only does no one care, I'm going to go back to my merchandise and recommend you pick up where are you? This one right here. You are not that special, and you can get the cute little mug. Okay. So again, no, no one cares. So he was named as a woman of the year, someone who was also like the first like female admiral or something like that. Who they named some time ago, and the fact that he has a job that he has anyway as a health assistant health secretary is ridiculous, considering that when he's in Pennsylvania, they had the nursing home policy there too, where you mix the nursing home patients with the COVID patients, and he obviously knew it was a bad policy because he got his mom out. So, if you were going to pick anyone, you should have been last of the list. But they had boxes to check, and he has his job, and he's serving under someone who doesn't have any health experience, so or public health experience. So that's the state of our world today. I don't know why you'd make all these decisions in a pandemic, but hey, that's what Biden did. And so Babylon Bee decided to name in retaliation and response, and it is a parody, website Levine as being the man of the year for them, and Twitter did not like that. So they ended up suspending the account and they couldn't post for a couple of hours. And the Babylon Bee founder, Seth Dillon, he said, "We're not deleting anything. Truth is not hate speech. If the cost of telling the truth is a loss of our Twitter account, then so be it." So someone pointed out in the comments, and I thought this was a pretty interesting argument. I do think there's merit to it, that they gave them the option, like, you can have your account back, but you do have to delete the tweet. Why doesn't Twitter just do that themselves? Like, if you get a violation on YouTube or something, they're like, "Oh, your video was deemed as hateful," and you can appeal it, which I don't know if people win those appeals. Like, I got flagged for hate speech. No, it wasn't hate speech. Actually, they did flag me for hate speech once, and I was retaliating to someone who was clearly saying racial slurs to me, but whatever, YouTube. But they got flagged for misinformation, and because I said stuff against CDC, that wasn't the case, and I asked them to specifically cite it in my appeal. They didn't respond the way. They're like, "No, we just found it was." So, but they just take it down. They just take it down themselves. They don't say, "If you wanna be able to post in a week or 2 weeks, then you gotta take down your stuff." They don't do that. Twitter's like, "If you want your stuff back up, if you want your response, you have to go and delete the tweet." Why doesn't Twitter just do that themselves? And it's a part of some kind of social humiliation of you kind of like taking it, admitting that you did something wrong. So you go in there and you delete it yourself. It's a part of a shaming humiliation process. It's like Game of Thrones walking the streets naked while someone's ringing the bell. Shame, shame, shame. Like that is your penance. And I really think that there's some truth to that. I thought the person made a pretty excellent point in the comments. So I commend them for deciding to not take that down, because there are some things in this world that are true, and your biology is one of them. And we can acknowledge that Levine is a trans woman. I that's a term, sure. We can affirm that he has gender dysphoria. That's true. But to say it's hateful to have someone list them as a man of the year, and it's okay for USA Today to list them as a woman of the year, um, beating out millions of other people who could have possibly, I guess, had that title, um, who are women. Here's a question for you guys. Here's a question for you guys. If people think that Levine and Leah Thomas and other folks are women, is Rachel Dolezal black? You guys remember her? She was had a job with NAACP. She's a white woman, and you can have jobs there and not be black, but she identified as a black person, and you can say, well, she was scamming people to have that job or whatever, but she claims that she always identified as a black person. She wants to be black, or she believes that she is black, and so she was just trashed, utterly trashed, and humiliated and canceled. But why can someone change their gender but not their race? And Matt Walsh asked this on Dr. Phil's this show when he went on there to talk to different trans activists. They actually cut this out of the show, so I only know because he told it. And I guess you could take it with a grain of salt, but I'm assuming it really happened. When he asked the question, like, "Can you change your race?" People thought that was so appalling. People thought that was such an offensive thing to say. But why isn't that a valid question? Why can't you change your race? And you say, "Well, gender is a construct." One of the tenets of CRT is that race is a construct, and I think most people would agree with that. So if gender is a construct, social construct, why and race is a social construct, why is it okay to change your gender but not your race? And people say the way to help with people with their dysphoria is to affirm it. So if people identified as black, why wouldn't they put bronzer on their face or I don't know, shoe polish or how I don't know how dark they wanna get. So, yeah, are y so people who affirm that kinda stuff, are you I went through this exercise with someone the other day on TikTok, and I could not get them to admit that they would be okay with their kid coming to them and identifying as black person and then, going to full blackface. And I'm like, "So do you support blackface?" And they would not answer the question. They would not go that far. They just stopped replying. And they were going back and forth a lot. I didn't forget about them though. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna do like a reply video and just point out the scenario of how people are just willing to die on really crazy hills. So to the bee who does great work, some of the stuff is cheese, but some of the stuff is really good. But reality is so odd that it's stranger than fiction. And sometimes when they make headlines, they are like predicting the future almost. But I guess it's not hard to read the tea leaves with how absurd the world is right now. But someone has to stand up and just say no to the madness. Someone just has to. Matt Walsh did a tweet about a thread about Leah Thomas and addressing people who want to be kind of middle ground on the gender ideology and be like, okay, well, this is too much, but be kind of middle ground with accepting the rest of it. And he's like, no, there is no middle ground. There is no middle ground. And I tend to agree with that, not just because of like slippery slope, but it's like if they are a woman, why can't they compete with women? I mean, obviously they're not, and that's the problem. And if it is really about ideology, he can do that on the men's team, where he was like 400th place. Now he's like number one. Isn't that isn't that interesting? So somebody's got to stand up to it, and as long as we keep entertaining it, it'll get worse and worse and worse. And unfortunately, it goes beyond even people who it does damage to even kids who think that they have gender dysphoria, who may not necessarily have gender dysphoria, because there's an unusual high number of kids in this generation, young women in this generation, particularly. Abigail Schreier wrote about this in her book Irreversible Damage, who identify as trans, who may have other underlining conditions. Maybe they're suffering through depression. There's one girl I follow on TikTok who ended up detransitioning, and she had different issues, but she said she really had a lot of internalized misogyny as well. But whatever the reasons, people will self-diagnose. And there's this one article that just got published on Substack. Uh, J.K. Rowling shared it, but this was a young woman who was radicalized on Tumblr, which is not hard to believe. Uh, but people are looking at all this stuff. These people who say that they're one way, they're like, maybe that's who I am. And they self diagnose. And because we have a society right now that's pressured to affirm rather than challenge, like when someone says, I believe, if it's a man or something, and they say, well, I believe I'm a girl, you're like, oh, you're stunning, you're brave, and you're beautiful. Instead of asking, like, well, what do you think that means? Or why do you feel that way? And instead of asking sort of other any kind of questions that may get to some kind of underlining condition or establish that everything that you think of women about women is actually based on stereotypes. um so there's that. People just affirm. And so there are people who have like two different therapy sessions where they just kind of affirm it. They write them prescription for hormones or whatever, and then they end up chopping up their breasts and doing irreversible damage to their bodies. And then they'll come to find out, "Oh, shoot, I made a mistake. This did not make me happy." And maybe at first, there's a lot of women who actually feel better on testosterone. It's not just because, "Oh, I'm finally who I am." Maybe that's the case for some people, but women have, like, a lot of anxieties, and testosterone can actually numb some of that. So, yes, there's a lot of people who will go on that stuff and feel better. That stuff will fade. The person who I mentioned who I followed, she said, eventually she just got hit hard in the face with biology and realized you just can't, like, change it. She was on testosterone, and she loves to sing. She has a beautiful voice. One day she tried to hit a high note that she should have been easy for her to do, and she couldn't do it, and it scared her. It scared her so bad to lose something like that that she really loved. And that was just kind of the beginning of the revelation of I'm doing harm to my body. And there were other things about her story and her journey. Her page is really blowing up on TikTok very fast from just sharing a lot of these stories and perspectives. She's not like a right wing or anything like that. She's just sharing her story, and some people are offended by that, triggered by that, by someone just sharing their story, their experience. She's not saying that other people who are trans don't exist by sharing her experience on why she needed to be transitioned, but there are women out there who are harmed because they are affirmed rather than questioned. So if we all just go along with the madness, there's other women, this number will probably get bigger. It's not just due to social acceptance, it's due to social engineering. I'm not saying social acceptance doesn't play a role in it, but that obviously plays a role in the engineering, doesn't it? Majority of people who have some kind of questions or issues about their gender will come to terms with that and sort of grow out of it. And whether people will not have any sort of issues or they'll realize that they are gay or they're lesbian or bisexual or whatever. And they won't want to seek things like hormones and surgery. But that's if they're kind of left up to their own devices. We have people who I think it was Vox like wrote an article just like identifying different things like, oh, your kids may be showing you're trans at a young age, and this is just like typical like tomboy stuff. So the kids could grow out of. There's so many young women who say, "I'm so glad that I grew up in a different time when it was okay to be a tomboy." And I'm not saying that people are saying it's not okay to be a tomboy, but people make a lot of assumptions about girls if they're masculine. And if we just allow it to keep going on, it's it's not going to be good. It's not going to be good for our generations. And there's such protection over this, and I don't know why. I don't know exactly why, but even the framing around the "Don't Say Gay" bill in Florida, when there's nothing really controversial about that bill. Nothing that if you're unaware of the parental rights and education bill, that's what it's actually called, was fine. It's a bill about, hey, teachers, administrations, they cannot hide things from parents about the well-being of their child. It should not be controversial in the least, but it shouldn't be. And it says you can't teach sexual orientation or they have instruction about that, which it doesn't say gay. It says sexual orientation. So that's neutral. It's a neutral law. And gender identity. But they go along with the "Don't Say Gay" bill because they want to inflame people and make them like, oh my gosh, they're coming for the gays again. Because they know people will be more sensitive to that. Because there's actually a lot of people who do not like the militant sort of gender ideology that's being pushed. So they're weaponizing the LGB part because they want to keep intact the T part, and they want to protect people being able to instill this indoctrination in kids. And I can only speculate that it's for nefarious reasons because nothing makes sense about it. Nothing makes sense about it. So I'm sure we'll continue to talk about that because it's still the talk, and I think people should take up some more bills like that all across the country. But this is obviously, and I'll just say this: this is obviously something that a lot of people want to die on a hill on. Because over the weekend, or I think when I was sort of leaving, maybe on Friday, maybe I mentioned that there was this guy who was like, "Your kids don't have any bleeping right You don't have any rights to know about your kids if they don't want to tell you that information. So I did a reply video and showed a video that I've showed you guys of Florida. I think it was Clay County, where the student was having secret meetings with the staff about their gender identity, and the father didn't know about it. And someone from the county told me that teachers and other people were being told to refer to this girl as a boy and stuff in school. And the father didn't know about this stuff until his daughter tried to hang herself. And so I told the man he was disgusting because I'm like, this is like a real reason, example of why that bill got passed in Florida. And his all this crazies came over to my account. And there was all these people saying, no, parents have no right to know that information. They were saying parents have no right to know that information unless the child tells them. Even though there's people in the comments that are like, my child ended up coming out to me sometime, but it took them a while to do that. And I asked them why did they wait? And they said, well, the counselor said not to because you might not be accepting. And they didn't care. They cared that the counselor said that, but they didn't love their child any less. They didn't kick them out the house. There's a lot of people who are assuming that people are going to do something nefarious to their kids, which there is something in the bill. It's like if they have reason to believe, like a prudent person would suspect that they would be neglected or kicked out or whatever, then yes, maybe deny that information. You just want to hide that, just have a blanket. Teachers and staff are able to hide that information from parents. And I'm like, you guys are ignoring like real world stuff because they're all saying like, well, the parent should have been trustworthy. I'm like, you guys are saying this dad who's sobbing over his child who tried to commit suicide is a bad dad? And they're like, yeah, because he couldn't trust him. Sometimes children are scared to come to people who genuinely love them because they are ashamed or they're embarrassed or people tell them not to, they're scared. And that's with a whole different range of issues. Sometimes people don't go to parents because they know they'll do the right thing, and sometimes people do want to self-harm. I'm just kind of talking in general now. There's kids who want to be a little rebellious and they don't want to go to their parents because they know they'll do the right thing and try to get them on the right track. So they'll go to people who will affirm them. Sometimes there are adults who get in kids' ears and tell them not to go forward to their parents. They'll be like, "Well, I'll handle it. You don't have to. Don't do anything or don't say anything. You don't know how to react." They'll scare them out of going to another figure. And there's just the fact that kids make the wrong decisions all the time. They may have every rational reason in the world to go to their parents about this stuff, and they still won't do it. And I don't understand why people are pretending like they don't know how people are. People always don't make the right decisions, especially kids. And you're talking about kids with some kind of mental distress, and it's the dad's fault. And I promise you, these are the crazy sort of conversations I was having like all weekend with people. So this is the hill they want to die on. That you have no right to know what your children are doing. And then there are people who are like, It's your kid has privacy because they're not your property." That's what some people were saying. Or I'm like, I don't believe that your children are your property. They are unique individuals, actually from the moment of conception. And that's why I think abortion is so heinous. But those people don't actually think that. But from the time they come into existence, it is the parents' job, their duty to protect that child. And if you don't feel you're up to it, then you can give up your parental rights, but you do have to ensure that someone else will take that there's some kind of whether it's the state or a relative or it's someone who adopts them, you do have to make sure that someone is willing to watch over that child and be responsible for that vulnerable child. And children are malleable, they're vulnerable, sometimes they can be scared, but sometimes you have to save them from other people. Sometimes you have to save them from themselves. I do not understand these people who want to continue driving the wedge between parents and adults, and I retract that. I do understand it to some degree, because there are people who maliciously want to do that because if there is that wall of separation there, they can indoctrinate them, and there's people who need to indoctrinate them and get them away from the parents' control. So I do understand that, but not everyone has those deep nefarious reasons. So I don't understand why, for the life of me, why they take such a crazy route when you know that schools there might be administration people in the administration whatever who may not have their best intentions at heart. Now some people might just be misguided, but there are malicious people within schools too. There are weirdos and pedos and stuff who are administrators, and don't get me wrong, I enjoyed my public school experience for the half of it, I guess, maybe like maybe the most part. I wouldn't send a kid to public school, especially today. And especially right now, man, I am like radicalized and never ever do that. And I don't even understand why people would right now today with all these kind of crazy stories. I'll get into that rant a different day. But like in Loudoun County, there was a situation. There was a boy in a skirt who was like trans, who went to the girls' bathroom, and they were trying to get this bathroom policy pushed or whatever. That you can go whatever bathroom you identify with, and he sexually assaulted a young woman, and her father went to the meeting. Now, there were people there at the school board meeting who were upset about critical race theory. There's people upset about the bathroom policies. He was there for his daughter because nothing was like being done about this boy. And then the superintendent lied and said, we're not aware of any of these incidents. And he knew he was lying, but he was trying to save face for their dumb policy. His father got upset. He got a bit rowdy, and he ended up getting arrested and dragged out. And they used that example in a letter from the National School Board Association to the White House, which they coordinated. No, I think to the Justice Department. The White House coordinated with the School Board Association to try to get people to use stuff like the Patriot Act to protect these people from these vicious parents. And this father, concerned about his daughter who was sexually assaulted, was one of the examples that was used by the White House and the School Board Association to justify using the Patriot Act against parents or requesting that the DOJ do it. So I think there's a lot of great teachers. I had a lot of great teachers at school. And if you are a teacher who thinks all this stuff is madness, you need to stand up and not be a coward and proclaim that there's a lot of madness and sickos and wackos in your profession, and you don't think that they're pushing the right kind of policy. You need to speak up in your profession. I understand there's unions and whatnot, and I understand the reasons why you maybe don't want to. But there are some very loud weirdos speaking on your behalf. Do not let them. There are some very malicious people who've done some very malicious things, and I don't understand people trying to take the side over the schools, over the parents. Because at the end of the day, you know a teacher for what, like 8 months? You know them for such a short amount of time. But it's the parents who have to be with that child for the duration of their lives. They're the ones who clothe them, they're the ones who feed them. And if something happens, God forbid, that they end up in a casket, they're the ones who have to bury them. So people saying it's not a right for a parent to know, who else right is it to know? You could say the child has a right to privacy, but why do you think the school has a right to keep it from the parent? Those are the hills that people are willing to die on. You should encourage, if you know some kind of legislator in your state, you should push them to try to put forward bills like the one in Florida and see where these Democrats stand. I tell you, there's a lot of weirdos out there. A lot of darn weirdos. Speaking of weirdos, let's move on. Let's move on. This is Biden's SCOTUS nominee. Last week, we went in detail about Senator Haley. He had an interesting thread about some of her background. And she unfortunately let some people into child pornography off like a lot. not off, but like really low sentences. I'm sorry. It was lower than the recommended amount. And I guess other judges do this. I don't know if this is like an extraordinary amount that's higher. Um, she's going on the Supreme Court, but you have these fact checkers. These fact checkers who are like, well, there's context missing. So it's true. Is it true? Because when I talked to you guys last week, I'm like, this is a very disturbing thread. We need to look more into it. So they can't deny it. ABC did a fact check, and they're like, Haley's office did not immediate. They said Supreme Court confirmation hearings for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson opened this week amid a flurry of misleading allegations by Republican Senator Josh Hawley that the nominee had a long record of letting child porn offenders off the hook during sentencing. Okay, how is it misleading? Allegations. He's right. He's correct. He's correct. In every single child porn case for which we can find records, Judge Jackson deviated from the federal sentencing guidelines in favor of child porn offenders. Haley tweeted Thursday, highlighting 9 cases from her time in federal district court judge. While court records show that Jackson did impose lighter sentences than federal guidelines suggested, that's the whole thing. That's what he said. How is it misleading? That's exactly what he said. Hawley's insinuation neglects critical context, including the fact that the senator himself has voted to confirm at least 3 federal judges who also engage in the same practice. We're and he there was a few Trump appointees that I guess did similar things, but to the degree that she did, not sure about that. They also say federal judges nationwide typically sentence below the child porn guideline in roughly 2 out of 3 cases. Someone noted in a blog, when deciding to go below the child porn guideline, typically impose sentences around 54 months below the calculated guideline minimum. So that may not necessarily be a good thing, even if it's common. Um, but there's something else in this article. Judge Jackson's record in these child porn cases does show she is quite skeptical of the ranges set by the child porn guidelines, but so too were prosecutors in the majority of her cases, and so too were the district judges nationwide, appointed by presidents by both parties. Friedman wrote. So, why is this a fact check? Is the question people are asking today? Because Josh's Twitter thread was not false. It wasn't false. This is an opinion piece. This is an opinion piece. So they do these fact checks, like missing context, so they can kind of call it false. Like this is a smear. It's true. And you could be like, oh, it's not that bad that she gave them less time if that's what you want to go with. If that's what you want to go with. There was someone else from Vox who did something similar, and they tried to say, well, Clarence Thomas and Gorsuch had did something similar. But the case where they sided with Clarence Thomas, they just took a snippet and were like, see here. But in the case with the sentencing, it was more like the executive branch was going too far. And they're like, even if it's against people who we don't think are good people, they should not be able to extend further than their purview. So it was more like a limited government thing rather than letting pornography people get less sentences. So again, if they want to make the case that hey, she was in the right with her perspective, that's one thing. But to pretend like he made it up and they bury the lead. I mean, if you click on the stories, because some people just see fact check, missing context, fact check misleading, or Ollie's misleading, and that's what they go with the different headlines. Let me show you with Mr. Kristall talked about. This guy, by the way, who was on The View talking about how the Constitution was trash, had this to say.
I need the Democrats to get up there and defend her just as vociferously as Lindsey Graham defended alleged attempted rapist Brett Kavanaugh. Like, I need that level of energy from the Democrats, especially when they come at her with this trumped up alleged issues about her sentencing on for sex offenders. Because what Josh Hawley is doing, let's be very clear. What Josh Hawley is doing when he tries to do this is he's trying to get her killed. He is trying to get violence done against a Supreme Court nominee.
Trying to get her killed? What? Okay, first of all, she has a lot of liberal groups that are backing her, and one of them is Demand Justice. And he is on the board of directors, by the way. Elie Mystal. I said Kristall. It's Mystal. His name sounds so made up. I don't know if it is or not. I don't know if it's his real name or not. If it was made up in some kind of, I don't know. But it does sound like a weird made up name. But Elie Mystal, he is on their board of directors. So he does have a very vested interest in her getting confirmed. But here's the thing about Kavanaugh. There was like no evidence. As a matter of fact, not only was there no evidence to prove that he had assaulted Ford, everyone involved in the case said it didn't happen. She had no time, she had no date, she had no location. You guys remember that time when you had like senators like showing a calendar, being in a yearbook, and like goofing, like, and Kavanaugh's just like it means flatulence or whatever. And there's all these conspiracies about things that kids wrote in yearbooks, and man, he is so lucky that he like had a calendar that he happened to write like meaningful events or whatever, and got a divine discernment or something in the past. Like one day you may need this, son. So good thing he did that at least, so he had some kind of recollection or events or whatever that could help him along in that sort of way. But everyone involved, including Ford's friend, said it did not happen. And who was the person who was allegedly at the party didn't have like that. No, she never mentioned anything about it. Like, isn't that weird that she wasn't like, "Hey, you left me there at the party with these guys"? That is not typical for teenagers. Just like none of it made sense at all. And some people are like, "I believe something happened to her." I don't. I'm not even gonna go that far. I think she lied. And she had some kind of issues or troubles or something. I feel for that, but this was a radical lie, and then they piled up story after story after story about him, like, gang raping people in lines in college parties, and all of it started, like, just disintegrating. Nothing came together, but they were trying to make him seem like a serial rapist, and they're like, "Well, this is the court. This is so important. It's so important, so we have to thoroughly go through all this stuff." And I don't disagree with that, but, like, it didn't make sense, and it was so much of it was a lie. Everything was a lie in regard to Kavanaugh, and they weren't just out like, "Well, it's for a job. It's just for a job." They weren't just trying the sort of allegations they made against him weren't weren't just for the purpose of him not getting a job. That was like, "We don't want you to have this position. We have to punish you because the wrong guy got elected. We didn't want Trump to get elected, and you dared to be the person that he picked. You guys got one over us on the Gorsuch thing by not having Merrick Garland. Thank God Merrick Garland's on the Supreme Court. Man, his DOJ is crazy. People are like, oh, he's still above board. No, he's not. So I can't imagine how he would have been on the court. But they were mad because of Gorsuch, and they were mad because of Kavanaugh, and they fought tooth and nail and wanted to destroy this life. I remember Kavanaugh talking about how he loved coaching. And then I think it was USA Today came out with an article on why he should never coach again. So people were like, it was just because of a job and we weren't trying to ruin his life. It was a lie. It was a lie. So that energy that they had, we're like, we got to make sure because this is the high court. This is the high court. You can keep that same energy with her because I think this is unusual. I think this is weird. And maybe you're like, no, this is totally normal, and this is like something that is just becoming of someone who's going to be on the Supreme Court. I think it's weird, and I think it's weird on top of the fact that there's a lot of weird stuff going on in this country as far as children perversion. We just kind of went through that. We have a president, his White House talked about the Florida bill. Like, we think it's disgusting. You think the parental rights bill in education is disgusting. Okay, and your Supreme Court nominee uh, gives lax sentences to pedophiles. Okay. It just seems like it's coming together, in my opinion. So I'm going to read through a little bit of this again if you've heard it before. Um, sorry, but I want to go through just a couple of these things for people who weren't aware. Um, this is Senator Hawley's Twitter thread. I've been researching the record of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, reading her opinions, articles, interviews, speeches. I've noticed an alarming pattern when it comes to Judge Jackson's treatment of sex offenders, especially those preying on children. Judge Jackson has a pattern of letting child porn offenders off the hook for their appalling crimes, both as a judge and as a policymaker. She's been advocating it for it since law school. So is that weird? Is that not weird that she has a far back history from it? This goes beyond soft on crime. I'm concerned that this is a record that endangers our children. As far back as her time in law school, Judge Jackson has questioned making convicts register as sex offenders, saying it leads to stigmatization and ostracization. She's suggested public policy is driven by climate of fear, hatred, and revenge against sex offenders. Don't you guys want to know? Sometimes you don't want to know when you look it up and like what kind of area you're living in, and you look up and see how many sex offenders may be in your area. Sometimes you don't want to know, but sometimes you need to know. So do we not think that's weird? And so originally she wrote this, and maybe she just thought it was going to be anonymous, so she could just spill out all of her feelings. Because at first this note was anonymous, or it didn't have a name signed on it. But then when she got like appointed to by Obama, then she had to like reveal that she was the person who wrote this. So you can write all kinds of like intimate feelings when you don't think anyone's going to know it was you. So do we not think this is weird? Do you not think this is weird? Judge Jackson has also questioned sending dangerous sex offenders to civil commitment. We have a civil commitment law in Missouri, and it protects children. It gets worse. As a member of the U.S. Sentencing Commission, Judge Jackson advocated for drastic change in how the law treats sex offenders by eliminating the existing mandatory minimum sentences for child porn. And Judge Jackson has said that some people who possess child porn are in this for either the collection or the people who are loners or find status in their participation in the community. What community would that be? The community of child exploitators? So I'm not going to read all through the thread like I did the other day, but it is interesting. I have shared it on Facebook and on Twitter. If you haven't seen it, I would recommend that you go check it out. But here's like one example. In United States versus Downs, the perp posted multiple image to an anonymous instant messaging app, including an image of a child under the age of 5. The guidelines recommended 70 to 87 months. Judge Jackson gave him the lowest sentence allowed by law, 60 months. In United States versus Sears, a sex offender distributed more than 102 child porn videos. He also sent lewd pictures of his own 10-year-old daughter. The guidelines recommended 97 to 121 months in prison. Judge Jackson gave him 71 months. So this is a guy who sent lewd pictures of his own daughter, his own child of 10 years old. And like, I would love for people ask questions about that on the Supreme Court, like while they're doing their hearings, and see what she has to say about that. I think this is weird. And you know what else I think is weird? Like, do you guys remember when QAnon was all the rage, when people were talking about it, and Trump was still president? They were asking questions to him about it, like, I guess because they want him to announce it, and he's just like, they're like, they think you're gonna save the world from pedophiles, and he's just like, I mean, I don't really know about them. Is that a bad thing? Is It sounds like that's a pretty good thing, right? And so I always thought it was weird. Every time they would bring up QAnon, they would bring up the pedophile stuff. And I'm like, they believe in some really weird stuff. I don't know if you guys know anybody who's into that stuff, but they believe in they're into some really weird stuff. But I'm like, why do they keep bringing up the pedophiles and high, like, authority in places and stuff? Why is that the thing that the media wants everyone to denounce and pretend isn't true or pretend isn't real? That's, like, probably the only thing that was legit with what they were talking about. And then it got even weirder when, like, cuties came out, and they're like, "Only the QAnon people hate cuties." That's that movie that came out on Netflix, and it had, like, an 11-year-old star. I think maybe she was around 11, and it was, like, a twerking competition or something. The movie it's more complicated, had more stuff to it than that, but, the posters, the imagery, and a lot of people watch it to comment on it, and we're like, "This is gross." But the backlash on it, the media was claiming that it was due to cuties. I did write an article about that on Black T News if you're interested in um, going back down memory lane. That's not the only problematic thing that Netflix has like had in relation to things being like sexual kind of scandals and stuff, but it was so bizarre. And there were people who were like, "No, I'm on the left and I don't think this is okay." Like like, "Why are you framing it this way?" It was so bizarre. And then you got, like, cases like, Epstein did not kill himself, and his, lady friend got convicted, and it's like, "Okay, but what about her clients?" Like, there's a client list, right? I thought it was weird that, uh, Bill Clinton got pictured with, um, one of his, like, alleged sex slaves, and then, like, immediately he was, like, at the DNC, and I'm like, "Y'all okay with him being there?" He's like, "If there's a reason to cut ties, y'all cut ties right now. Like, why are they there? Why is Hillary and Bill there? Especially after this Epstein thing." I mean, finding the painting of Bill in the blue dress would have been weird enough. Would have been weird enough. The amount of times he went to the White House while Clinton was in office would have been weird enough. To just be like, "Let's sever those ties right now." But you had, like, a picture, a and you're just gonna be like, "Hey, let's have him talk with the PNC about why you should vote for Joe Biden." This is some weird stuff. Some really weird stuff, and it really seems like they're trying to rehabilitate their image a bit, in my opinion, 'cause I do think they are seriously considering trying to run Hillary again. I'm not saying that's gonna happen. I think there's obviously issues that people can see. She's up there in age as well, as Biden. So, but it is weird to me. They're, like, revamping some stuff with the Clinton Foundation. They're both teaching master classes. So, if anyone should have canceled anyone, like, in their party, it should have been the Clintons, and it should have been a while ago, but I was just floored. I'm like, "Y'all really gonna have him speak at the DNC and act like nothing happened?" So, I'm I question a lot, and I don't think that Miss Jackson, should just sort of get a free pass from Republicans and everybody because they're like, "Oh, we got the Democrats good a couple times, let them get their person through." They can pick someone else. I don't think she'll recuse herself. It seems like people are gonna be like Mr. Mistall and double down and be like, "Oh, Republicans are racist." He's saying they straight up want her to die because they're drawing light and attention to her record. That's hysterical. That's crazy. But it is her record nonetheless, to him and the fact checker. Brett Kavanaugh was not a serial gang rapist in college, nor did he sexually assault Christine Ford. And there's no evidence to support that. And she never presented any, by the way. Not anything that made sense or held up. Everyone else involved denied her allegation, including her friend, who she then threw under the bus. So I want Republicans to raise a stink about this. I want them to have many meetings, and I want them to have conversations with people across the aisle, and I want people to call their senators. Me calling my senators probably not gonna do much because neither of them are up for a re-election, and they're both Democrats. But I think people should make calls. I think people should write letters. And I think this is a creepy thing, and this is a lifetime appointment, and this is a long time sort of pattern and feelings. And if she wants to explain all this, and she wants to explain it in a convincing sort of way, she has the floor to do that. But if she does one of those, I look forward to having these conversations when I'm confirmed. I want to see some no's. I don't want to see any bipartisan aisle crossing, and I would like, unless it's for her not to be confirmed. And I know there's a lot of people out there who want the first Black woman or whatever on the Supreme Court. But why do we have to settle? Why do we have to settle for bad stuff, man? We're like, oh, Obama's Black president. I didn't like him. He wasn't a good president. I'm glad people can be like, oh, America, you can do anything's possible. Yeah, sure. But why him though? I would like a good Black president, you know? Got Kamala Harris, like, aren't you excited? I'm like, no, I think she's trash. I don't like her. I'm not excited. You move the needle for me. No, I'm not excited about Miss Jackson. I think we can do better. And the people who are just so aghast by that, leftists don't like Clarence Thomas, okay? So let's not pretend like people care about as race nearly as much as they claim. Nearly as much as they claim. It's about politics. It'll always be about politics. And this I don't understand. This I don't understand. And then maybe they were like, well, she got through before. What excuse can they have not to vote her through? But they had to have known about this. And I think it's weird. I think it's weird. And again, maybe people can be like, oh, all this reasoning, this and that. But people aren't presenting very good, reasonable explanations other than they don't like the fact that Haley pointed it out. Fact check. Okay, I know we're going a little bit over, but I do want to get to this video. This Planned Parent, sorry, it's not Planned Parenthood. It's Disney. For a very old cartoon. LiveAction.org actually showed this. They put up on their Twitter page over the weekend, and it's some weird, creepy sort of propaganda about population control from the 1960s. And some people didn't see what was the issue with it, but I wanted to go through it because I thought it was weird.
And mother, and just a few children. Now imagine that there is a house to live in, and a plot of land which the father works to support them all. There is an ox to pull the plow, and the land yields a good crop. With only this many at a meal, there is enough for all, and even a little left over to provide money for some comforts and modern conveniences. The mother doesn't have to work too hard and stays healthy and happy. But now let's paint another picture of this family. And suppose that in time, more and more children are born. But let us also suppose that the house and the plot of land remain the same. Now the entire crop must be used just for food. But even so, with this many mouths to feed, there won't be enough to go around. Of course, there will be no money for modern conveniences. Today, things have changed. Modern science has given us a key that makes possible a new kind of personal freedom: family planning. You can have one child, or two, or more. You can space them out over a number of years. You can choose to stop having them altogether. You can have only the children you want, and only when you want them. That's what family planning can mean to you.
Well, that's easy enough. Uh-oh. Now she has a question. She wants to know if it is an acceptable thing to do and what other people think about it.
There is an acceptable way for everyone. And many couples are already practicing family planning.
Is it safe? Oh, that is a good question.
Family planning is easy and medically safe. In fact, it actually improves the health of mothers and children.
We will try it.
Any couple who wisely chooses family planning will definitely improve future prospects for their whole family, and especially the children. And on a larger scale, if enough couples choose family planning, the balance will be restored. Every couple has the opportunity to help build a better life, not just for themselves, but for people everywhere.
So, there just appears to be, there's quite a bit of diversity in there. So there's some people like, I don't see anything wrong with that video. And they're like, you mean besides the sexism and the racism? So this is from 1968. And for those of you unaware, eugenics played a pretty big part of our country. It found its way into our legal system, into our colleges, late in the late 1800s, and then into the 1900s, as Nazis and stuff became a bigger thing. It was not as out in the open. But Margaret Sanger, who's the founder of Planned Parenthood, was one of those eugenicists, and she did want to limit the population of minorities, of people who were poor, of people who were feeble-minded, and etc. So they were trying to breed out suffering is the appeal. So Margaret Sanger, as much flack as like people on the pro-life side give her, she was not even as big into abortion as Alan Guttmacher, who took over Planned Parenthood. And Alan Guttmacher was also a very big eugenicist. And then 2 years after this video, by the way, Planned Parenthood started doing abortions within their clinics. So when people talk about family planning, that is what Planned Parenthood is. That's what they consider family planning, not just giving out condoms or birth control to people. And I understand birth control helped ease a lot of people's lives, or some people who don't believe in any of that stuff at all. And Catholics would believe that you are only supposed to like be procreating for the purpose of, I guess, having kids and stuff, the process or whatever. So they're not even really into the birth control like that. But there's people who really like birth control, and we're glad to have it and use it, etc. And there's also cost to also using it as well. And they're like, it helps the mother and it helps the child. I'm like, how does birth control help the child, other than like, to me, it is, I guess they're going with because there's less kids to go around and you'll have more things. And things could definitely get tight the more kids come around. And then I can tell you that's my personal experience with my family. But as that crop they showed in the video, how they getting like, let's say it's still the same crops. They're like, no, if you have a bigger family, you're going to have to figure out how you can have more. And maybe y'all gonna be upset with the child labor, but y'all, you should have had some of them bigger kids getting out and helping with them fields. Because he got more arms and legs to help out with that stuff. And that's what big families do as far as like the raising and rearing of their kids. They teach responsibility to the older kids to help, take care of the younger ones. So you got farm hands, man, you better help with the farm. But when people bring up like abortion and sort of like a financial sort of status, like, oh, what if you don't have enough for the kids and whatnot? I'm just like, okay, if my youngest sister Tina wasn't around, could I have had more toys? And would have times maybe not been as hard? Maybe. But I wouldn't trade her for those things. So to me it's such a weird thing, and people are just insisting that this is about birth control. Even if it were just about birth control, just be aware of like the mindset that people did have back then with people like Margaret Sanger, who were purposely trying to limit the population of Black people and other sort of minorities. But again, 2 years after this, they did start doing abortions in Planned Parenthood. And when you go to Planned Parenthood, that is the sort of talking that they're doing. Like, you can plan when to have your family. You should have the freedom of when you decide to have children. That is the language. When Michelle Williams was pregnant and with her Golden Globe, she's like, I'm so happy that we have access to abortion because I got to decide when was the best time for me to have my family. So when people talk about family planning, they are not only talking about, in this context, I don't think they're only talking about birth control. I don't think so. I don't think that. And I do think it's interesting that they decided to have like an ethnic family be like the star of it, because that was like the target. That was the target of the whole eugenics movement. So I think that's a bit suspicious. And if you look at Planned Parenthood when they do advertising, I showed this on a show before, but I don't have it queued up. When they had Mother's Day, they had these ads, and they had all of them there was like 2 that had Black women, and then there was like another one that had Hispanic women, but they normally use women of color because they know that's the base that they're trying to reach. They go into these inner cities and they plead to these women of color. As a matter of fact, Joe Biden, when they were talking about maybe it was a Mississippi bill or whatnot, and they were like, we need access to abortion for women of color. So they are still pitching specifically to minority families to keep deciding when they will have their children and to plan. And they're like, only keep the children that you want. And someone I kind of explained this a little bit in the comments of their video, and someone replied under me, and they're like, well, we need to teach responsibility with people with their family planning, and to not have kids that they can't afford. And I'm just like thinking, like, half of my family probably would not exist. So like, life happens. We need to help people with resources if we can. And I don't mean government funding stuff. I mean charitable or whatever, and create a climate where people can succeed, not like have gas be like $5 a gallon right now and be like, buy an electric car. So we need to do what we can to help people be able to survive and take care of their families. But there's no guarantee that people are going to have lives where they're going to just be able to, I don't know, buy all the Netflix accounts that they want. That's not in the Constitution anywhere. But everyone should be entitled to the right to life. So having this idea that just have the children that you want, you should have the children that you make. And I do think people should be responsible for when they bring children into the world. And a lot of that I think has to do with being selective of who you sleep with. And we could start from there. We could really start from there and really begin to change the state of the world. But I thought this was a creepy video when I was watching it. And I think if you know the history and just know how deep eugenics was embedded within our country, you know sort of how bad this was. And like I said, it was in colleges, made its way through the Supreme Court, it made its way um, in economics for sure. Royal Meeker worked for Woodrow Wilson. He knew the minimum wage, for example, would would be hard for minorities, but it would make some of them unemployable or whatever. But he thought that was a good thing because if people get on welfare, then they can live off the government. Basically, they could kind of control them as they bred. um, and the idea when people bring up living wage, that's an idea that's rooted in elitism of people who felt that they were too good to work, so having a minimum wage, they did know that it would hurt minorities, but they wanted the wages a certain wage because they didn't want to work for less, and they didn't like people coming in and undercutting them. So there's a lot of aspects of history when people talk about the different racism, and it wasn't just racism. There wasn't just black people that they disliked. There was other groups that they didn't like that weren't necessarily black or whatever. But so it goes beyond just race. But people do talk about racial politics a lot, and they conveniently leave out some really big things like the minimum wage because so many people like it or want it, even though it kills small businesses. So anyway, I just thought it was an interesting video, and I wanted to share it with you guys. And at first I did not process, I guess, that this was a Disney video until I saw Donald Duck in the video, and then I think my mouth dropped. I just didn't process. I'm like, Disney was making this sort of video, and I guess they got paid or whatever. But I don't know how deep the philosophy or ideology was. They probably like, hey, can you make this video with the script? And someone might have said sure, and they used Donald Duck and convince these families who they trust to go this family planning route as they try to limit the population of these people. But it is about population control. And because they weren't just talking about families, they're like, we can restore the balance. And they're saying this is good for everyone. For everyone to just have less kids. And then some people are like, well, this is good because we do have too many people and it's and we need to have some kind of population control. And I'm like, why do you believe that? Because the West is actually not meeting its replacement rate for kids right now. So you have people like Elon Musk who are sounding the alarm, like, we're going to be missing a lot of people for our workforce and other stuff that we need that aren't here because we're not replacing each other because there's not enough people having kids. Someone said it sounds like they're saying it's okay to have as much sex as you want with who you want because there will be a Planned Parenthood near you for the abortion, no responsibility behind their actions. Now, they didn't mention PP, and they didn't mention that, but as I said, 2 years after this, they did go that route, and there were people who were pushing for this to happen. I mean, that Roe v. Wade and etc. So they were pushing to make abortion laws more lax, and there were a lot of chauvinistic men and eugenicists and stuff who were pushing for these sort of things to make these sort of ideas acceptable. And you hear it on a daily basis today, and you hear it directed toward minorities, and you hear people say people of color need abortions without like people processing that they're advocating that these people will have access to kill their kids. And then if you call it a kid or a child or whatever, like, oh my gosh, why'd you say that? That's not what they are. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Children are just people below like maturity age, and it is their child. But people get so offended when I don't know, speak the truth. So anyway, that's the show for today. I thank you guys for tuning in. As I said, don't be a coward, be brave. I want these Republicans to be brave. I think they're going to just shellac the Democrats in 2022 and hopefully 2024. And it's not weird for like people to take back House or whatever and send it after like someone's in power. And but I hope they just get like ghetto stomped, as they say. But I want Republicans to rise and be worthy of that sort of power as well. And like I said, I think they should really raise a big stink about Miss Jackson at the Supreme Court, because I think it's a weird record to have for someone going to the highest court. I mean, they just did everything they could. They invented the story about Kavanaugh, and they look into the dumbest, smallest stuff for like Gorsuch or whoever, and she has a record of just giving these smallest sentences even lower than the recommended amount to these people into child porn, including someone who shared pictures of his own child. People, you better call somebody. You better call somebody up and say, you better stop this. and I think, don't get me wrong. I think it'll be. I really don't think that she'll probably step down, because the media and pundits are really, really going to bat for her right now, from what I can see. And I don't know how much heat people can turn up to make her want to step down. And I think it's a very slim chance very slim and not likely that the Democrats will not vote lockstep and then have Kamala break the tie if she needs to. But man, Republicans better not blow this, and at least just let them have the 50-50. I think this record's weird. And I don't want her to be confirmed. I don't want her to be confirmed anyway, but I definitely don't want her to be confirmed. Pick somebody else. Anyway, guys, thank you for watching the show today. Please follow me across all my other social media platforms, on Twitch, on YouTube, on TikTok, on Instagram. All my handles are at Black Tea News. The only one that's different is Twitter. That one's at True Black Tea. Make sure you guys are checking out different merchandise at the store. And like the My Money, My Business, people are like, oh my gosh, why do you care about abortion? And blah, blah, blah. Well, it's wrong. But you guys do want my taxpayer dollars to fund this stuff, or at least subsidize Planned Parenthood and stuff. So you know what? Anything you guys talk about that you want my money, it is definitely my business. So that's why I made this cool shirt. So you guys can check that out at the website. I did mention the You Are Not That Special shirt. And I also have those in cute little mugs you guys can check out. Got some black tea stuff, and of course I got the goat hoodies and shirts you guys can check out at the store. So please get those things at the store. Check out different videos I have on the website. Please check out different articles that I have written, and also I do have books that I have written as well that you guys can check out. I have chapter books. I have things from going from kids to like new adult. I mostly write fiction. I have 15 published books. One is nonfiction. So if you guys can find all that stuff, if you go to blacktnews.com and hit the merchandise button, there is a banner with some of my books on it, and it'll take you to my book website. All my stuff is available on Amazon, on paperback, ebook, or if you have Kindle Unlimited. I thank you guys who have looked at some of my stuff and reviewed some of my stuff. I really, really appreciate it. But God bless, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.